The heavy rain lashed against the small suburban house, thunder rolling across the sky. On the front porch, a little girl no older than 7 stood shivering, her thin dress plastered to her body. Her hair clung to her tear-streaked face as she pounded her fists against the locked wooden door. "Please, please let me in." Her voice cracked, almost lost in the storm. But from inside came a harsh, merciless voice, the voice of her stepmother. "Stay out there until you learn your place. Cry all you want, it won't change anything." The sound of the lock sliding into place echoed louder than the thunder, then silence. The little girl pressed her palms to the door, her knuckles white, her small shoulders trembling, her teeth chattered from the cold. Rainwater pooled around her feet. She hugged herself, but nothing could stop the chill crawling into her bones. Before we begin, please leave a comment about this story and give us a score from 1 to 10. How are you doing today? If there is something on your heart, feel free to share it. I am always here to listen. This channel is a place where stories bring healing and courage. I hope this one gives you a moment of reflection and a reminder that even in darkness, kindness still exists. Now, let us continue. A pair of bright headlights cut through the curtain of rain. A sleek black Mercedes slowed near the gate, its tires crunching against the wet gravel. The window rolled down and a man's deep, steady voice called out, "Why is there a child standing in the storm?" The car door opened and out stepped Alexander Hayes, a 42-year-old millionaire businessman known for his sharp mind and vast empire. His suit was immaculate, but his eyes carried a shadow of loneliness, a weight left by tragedies he rarely spoke of. Tonight, as he returned from a late meeting, he never expected to see such a heartbreaking sight. The little girl turned her pale face toward him. Her lips trembled. My stepmother locked me out," she whispered, her words almost drowned by the rain. Alexander froze. His jaw tightened as he looked at the door behind her, then back at the child's small frame shaking under the downpour. Memories flickered, memories of his own childhood when he too had felt abandoned and unwanted. He drew in a sharp breath, forcing them aside. He stepped closer, kneeling so his eyes met hers. "You'll get sick if you stay here," he said gently. "Come with me, just for tonight. You'll be safe." The girl's wide eyes shimmered with both fear and fragile hope. She hugged herself tighter, hesitant. "What's your name?" Alexander asked softly. "Elise," she murmured. "Elise," he repeated, his voice carrying a promise. He shrugged off his coat and draped it around her small shoulders. The fabric swallowed her tiny frame, but warmth slowly returned to her body. Without another word, Alexander scooped her up into his arms. She clung to him instinctively, her cheek pressed against his chest as the rain battered down. As he carried her to his car, Elise glanced back once more at the dark house, its windows sealed, curtains drawn. Behind those walls was the woman who had locked her out, and the father who was far away on business, unaware of his daughter's silent suffering. Her throat ached, but no sound came, only tears mixed with the rain on her face. Alexander opened the car door, placing her gently on the leather seat. He turned the heater on, wrapped a towel around her, and whispered, "Don't worry, Elise, tonight you won't be alone." The car pulled away from the house, its taillights glowing red against the storm. Inside, Elise clutched his coat tightly, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. Alexander kept his gaze on the road, but every so often he looked at her through the rear-view mirror. Something in her fragile presence stirred feelings deep within him, feelings of responsibility, anger, and compassion all at once. Outside, the rain poured harder, but inside the car, a new journey had quietly begun. The black Mercedes glided through the rain-soaked streets. Inside, the heater hummed softly, filling the car with warmth. Elise sat curled in the passenger seat, Alexander's coat wrapped tightly around her. Drops of rain still clung to her lashes, but her sobs had quieted. Alexander kept glancing at her. Each time he looked, his chest tightened. Her little hands gripped the edge of the coat as if afraid it might be taken away. He recognized that kind of fear. It was not just the cold of the storm. It was the fear of being unwanted. "Elise," he said gently, "are you hungry?" She hesitated, then gave a small nod. Her voice was no louder than a whisper. "Yes." Alexander turned the wheel, heading toward the city. Soon they stopped at a small 24-hour diner. The neon sign flickered against the wet pavement. He opened her door, held his umbrella over her, and led her inside. The waitress looked up in surprise as the little girl entered, her clothes still damp, but she said nothing. Alexander ordered a bowl of warm soup, some bread, and hot milk. When the food arrived, Elise stared at it for a long moment before touching it. She lifted the spoon carefully, almost as though expecting someone to slap it away. Only when Alexander gave her a reassuring nod did she sip the soup. Warmth spread through her body and a faint sigh escaped her lips. Alexander watched silently, his hands folded. The sight of her eating, so cautiously, so quietly, made his throat ache. How many times had she eaten in fear? How long had she been suffering without anyone noticing? When she finally looked up, their eyes met. She whispered, "Thank you. Before we continue, I want to pause for just a moment. Tell me, if you were in Alexander's place, what would you have done seeing a little girl locked outside in the rain? Would you have stopped your car or kept driving?" Please leave your thoughts in the comments and give this story a score from 1 to 10. Sharing your feelings helps us all reflect on courage and kindness. Now, back to the story. After the meal, Alexander paid the bill and guided Elise back to the car. The storm had eased a little, but puddles still glistened under the streetlights. He drove her to his own mansion on the outskirts of the city, a grand estate with tall iron gates and lights glowing warmly inside. Elise's eyes widened as they entered the driveway. She had never seen such a place before. The car stopped and Alexander led her inside. The marble floors and high ceilings seemed endless compared to the small, cold house she had come from. One of the housekeepers, Mrs. Taylor, hurried forward, her expression full of concern when she saw the drenched child. "Sir, who is this?" she asked softly. Alexander answered firmly, "This is Elise. She will be staying here tonight. Prepare a warm bath and some clean clothes for her." Mrs. Taylor nodded at once and gently guided Elise away. The little girl looked back at Alexander as she followed, her eyes filled with both fear and fragile trust. He gave her a small nod, silently promising she was safe. When Elise returned later, wrapped in soft pajamas and smelling of soap, Alexander was waiting in the sitting room with a cup of warm milk. He beckoned her over. She sat hesitantly on the edge of the sofa, her hands folded tightly. "Elise," he began, his voice steady but kind, "can you tell me why your stepmother locked you outside?" The girl lowered her head. Her small fingers twisted the hem of her sleeve. For a moment she said nothing. Then in a trembling voice she whispered, She doesn't like me. She says I'm a burden. She says my father only loves me because of my real mother. She said I should disappear." Her words cut through Alexander like a blade. His hands clenched into fists. He forced his tone to remain calm. "Where is your father now?" "On a business trip," Elise replied. "He's always away. He doesn't know—" Her voice broke and she buried her face in her hands. Alexander leaned forward, speaking firmly but gently. "Listen to me. What your stepmother did is cruel and wrong. You are not a burden. Do you understand? You are a child who deserves love and care." Elise peeked at him through her fingers, her eyes brimming with tears. For the first time that night, She saw something different. Someone who believed her, someone who would not turn away. Alexander sat back, his thoughts heavy. He had built empires, defeated rivals, faced endless challenges, but this innocent child abandoned in the storm shook him more deeply than any battle of business ever had. He remembered his own childhood, the long nights he had spent in silence after his parents' fights, the loneliness of feeling unseen. Perhaps that was why Elise's pain struck him so sharply. He had sworn long ago never to let anyone close enough to hurt him again. Yet here was this little girl silently breaking down those walls. As the clock ticked past midnight, Elise's eyelids grew heavy. She curled up on the sofa, clutching the blanket Mrs. Taylor had given her. Alexander watched her for a long moment. Finally, he rose, lifted her gently in his arms, and carried her to the guest bedroom. He laid her down, pulled the covers over her, and stood there in the quiet glow of the lamp. For the first time in years, he whispered words he hadn't spoken to anyone. "You're safe now, I promise." Outside, the storm slowly faded into silence. Inside the mansion, a fragile bond had begun to form, one that would soon be tested in ways neither Alexander nor Elise could imagine. The morning sun rose slowly, scattering pale light across Alexander's vast estate. Birds chirped in the garden, and the storm of the night before felt like a fading memory. Inside, Elise stirred awake in the guest bedroom. For a moment, she blinked at the soft sheets and the warm glow of the lamp on the nightstand. It felt unreal, like a dream. But then her small fingers touched the blanket and she realized it wasn't a dream. She had truly slept in peace without fear of the door locking or a cruel voice shouting at her. Her lips trembled as tears welled up, this time not from fear but from relief. Mrs. Taylor entered quietly, carrying a tray with warm porridge, fruit, and milk. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said softly. "Eat a little. You need strength." Elise nodded shyly and picked up the spoon. For once, she didn't feel rushed or forced. She ate slowly, savoring each bite. Meanwhile, Alexander stood by the tall window in his study, staring at the driveway. His mind was unsettled. The image of Elise pounding on the locked door under the storm still haunted him. His fists clenched at the memory of her stepmother's cruelty. He knew he couldn't just keep Elise with him forever. Her father was alive, perhaps blind to the truth, but still her guardian. Yet sending Elise back to that house without answers felt unbearable. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. If you were Alexander, would you immediately confront the stepmother and demand answers? Or would you gather evidence first to make sure the truth couldn't be denied? Please leave your answer in the comments and rate this story from 1 to 10. I am truly curious to know your thoughts. It helps us all reflect on courage and justice. Now, let us return to the story. By late morning, Alexander had made his decision. He would take Elise back home, but not silently. He wanted to see this woman with his own eyes, to hear her excuses. And if what Elise said was true, he would make sure her suffering ended. The black Mercedes pulled up in front of Elise's house. The front yard still held puddles from the storm. Elise sat silently in the back seat, clutching Alexander's coat around her. Her eyes darkened as she saw the familiar door. Alexander noticed. He leaned closer. "Don't be afraid. I'm right here." She gave the faintest nod, though her little hands trembled. The door swung open after a few sharp knocks. Rachel, Elise's stepmother, appeared dressed in a crisp silk blouse, her hair neatly styled, her lips painted a careful shade of red. To any outsider, she looked like the perfect wife and caretaker. But her eyes froze when she saw Alexander standing beside Elise. For a split second, panic flickered across her face. Then, as if a mask had been placed instantly, she smiled sweetly. "Oh my goodness," she exclaimed in a sugary tone. "Elise, where have you been? I was so worried." She reached forward as if to pull the girl inside. Elise flinched, stepping back. Her eyes darted toward Alexander. Alexander's gaze hardened. His voice was deep, steady, carrying quiet authority. "Is it true you locked this child outside in the rain last night?" Rachel blinked, her expression shifting quickly into false shock. "Locked her out? Of course not. You must have misunderstood. She was being stubborn about eating dinner. I told her she couldn't leave the porch until she finished, but I never meant for her to stay outside that long. Perhaps she exaggerated." Elise's lips parted, but no words came. Her small hands tightened around Alexander's sleeve. Alexander stepped forward, his tall frame towering over Rachel. "A 7-year-old child, standing alone in the storm, is that your idea of discipline?" His voice sharpened, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. Rachel's eyes darted nervously, then she gave a soft laugh, trying to regain control. "You don't understand. Children can be difficult. Sometimes you must be strict for their own good. Elise is sensitive. She imagines things." Elise's eyes brimmed with tears. She shook her head faintly, but no sound escaped her throat. Alexander placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry," he murmured to her, then turned back to Rachel. "I don't care how you justify it. I saw her with my own eyes. If I ever witness such cruelty again, I will not remain silent." Rachel's smile faltered. For a moment her face hardened, revealing the sharpness behind her mask. But just as quickly she smoothed her expression, tilting her head innocently. "You're mistaken, Mr. Hayes. I would never hurt her. She's like my own child." Alexander narrowed his eyes but said nothing further. He knew confronting her directly might only make her more cunning. What he needed was proof, undeniable evidence. He crouched down to Elise's level. "I'll come back," he said softly. His voice meant only for her. "Stay strong. You're not alone anymore." Elise's eyes glistened. She nodded faintly, clutching his sleeve for just a second longer, before letting go. Rachel stepped aside with her false smile, guiding Elise inside. But as the door closed, her eyes met Alexander's with a cold, sharp glint, as if daring him to interfere again. Alexander stood still on the porch, rainwater dripping from the eaves above. Inside, the door shut with a heavy thud. His chest burned with anger, but his mind was already turning. He could not walk away, not this time. The door slammed shut behind Elise, and the silence on the porch lingered long after Alexander had stepped away. He stood in the rain for a moment, staring at the house. Every instinct inside him screamed to storm back in, to tear away the mask Rachel wore so carefully. But he forced himself to breathe deeply. He knew the truth. If he acted too quickly, she would twist everything, and Elise would suffer even more. Back in his car, Alexander gripped the steering wheel tightly. His reflection stared back at him in the rain-speckled glass. "I need proof," he thought. "Without proof, I am only another outsider accusing her. With proof, no one can deny what this child has endured." That night, Elise sat in her room. Her wet hair clung to her cheeks, her little hands curled around the blanket Rachel had thrown at her carelessly. Dinner had been cold bread and water. Rachel's voice echoed in her mind. "You embarrassed me in front of that man. If you ever speak about what happens in this house, you'll regret it." Elise squeezed her eyes shut. She wished her father was home. She wished someone would believe her cries without her having to beg. Quietly, she pulled a piece of paper from under her pillow. With a dull crayon, she drew a door, heavy locks across it, and a small figure curled up outside in the rain. It was her way of speaking when words failed her. She folded the paper and tucked it into her pocket, hoping one day she could show it to someone who cared. Meanwhile, Alexander sat in his study, scrolling through contacts. He thought of the people he trusted. few in number, but loyal. One name stood out: Detective Sarah Monroe, a childhood friend who had become a police investigator. If anyone could help discreetly, it was her. Before we continue, I want to pause for a moment. Imagine being Elise, only 7 years old, locked out in the rain by the one person meant to care for you. How would you cry for help if no one believed your words? Please share your feelings in the comments and rate this story from 1 to 10. Your voice matters. It helps us reflect on the courage to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Now, let us return to the story. The following afternoon, Alexander returned to Elise's neighborhood. He didn't approach the house directly. Instead, he parked near the corner, observing. Children played in the street, neighbors chatted on porches, but Elise's house remained unnervingly quiet. Curtains drawn, shadows moving faintly inside. He spotted Mrs. Linda Cooper, an elderly neighbor, watering her plants. She had known the family for years. Alexander stepped out, introduced himself politely, and asked carefully, "Have you ever noticed anything unusual with the little girl, Elise?" Mrs. Cooper sighed, lowering her watering can. "She's a sweet child, but I've seen her standing outside for hours sometimes. I once brought her a cookie, but Rachel scolded me, saying Elise had been punished and I was interfering. I didn't want to cause trouble, so I stayed quiet." Her eyes clouded with guilt. "Now that you ask, I wish I had done more." Alexander's chest tightened. Each piece of testimony was another stone in the foundation of truth. He thanked Mrs. Cooper and promised her she had already done more than she knew by speaking up. Later that evening, inside the house, Elise tried to keep her head down during dinner. Rachel sat across from her, her smile honeyed in front of the maid, Grace, but when Grace left the room, Rachel's tone dropped cold as ice. "You think that man will save you? He won't. He'll forget you. Everyone does. Even your father leaves you behind." Elise's eyes filled with tears, but she kept silent, staring at her plate. She had learned that any answer only brought more cruelty. Rachel leaned closer, whispering harshly, "If you ever draw those little pictures again, I'll burn them. Do you hear me? Not a word, not a trace." Elise pressed her lips together, nodding faintly. Inside, her heart sank deeper, but Grace, the maid, had overheard fragments. Standing in the hallway, she paused, clutching the dish in her hands, her face pale. She had seen the bruises, the hunger, the silence. Fear kept her quiet, but guilt weighed heavier each day. That same night, Alexander met with Detective Sarah Monroe at a quiet cafe. Rain tapped against the windows as he slid a folded paper across the table, the drawing Elise had given him earlier depicting the locked door. "She can't speak it aloud," Alexander said, his voice low, "but this is her cry for help." Sarah studied the paper, her brow furrowing. "If this is true, it's child neglect at the very least, but to act officially, I'll need more. Witnesses, recordings, medical reports. Do you have anyone inside the house who might speak?" Alexander thought of Grace, the timid maid. He nodded slowly. "There may be someone, but she's scared." Sarah leaned forward. "Then we'll have to give her a reason not to be. I'll start by pulling school records, medical files, and speaking quietly with the neighbors. You focus on that maid. If she talks, everything could change." Alexander sat back, a spark of determination in his eyes. For the first time, he felt the tide beginning to shift. Back at the mansion, Elise sat alone in her darkened bedroom. She pulled another crayon from under her pillow, her small hand trembling. She drew again, this time a tall figure standing beside her, shielding her from the rain. Next to it, she wrote a single shaky word: hope. She folded the paper tightly, hiding it deep inside her pocket, a small act of defiance, a fragile seed of faith. And miles away, Alexander promised himself, "I will not abandon her." Not this time. The truth will come to light and she will never stand alone in the rain again. The next morning, Elise walked slowly to the kitchen, her little feet dragging against the cold wooden floor. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. She had barely slept. Rachel stood at the counter, humming softly as she sliced fruit, her smile sweet but her eyes sharp. "Sit," Rachel said smoothly. She placed a small bowl of plain porridge in front of Elise. "Eat it all. No complaints." Elise lowered her head and lifted the spoon. She forced herself to swallow, though each bite felt like a stone. When she paused for breath, Rachel leaned closer, her tone turning icy. "If you leave even one bite, you'll spend the night outside again. Do you understand?" Elise nodded quickly, tears pricking her eyes. She didn't dare speak. Grace, the maid, stood by the sink, her hands trembling as she washed dishes. She had heard every word. Her heart ached as she glanced at the frail little girl, but fear chained her tongue. Rachel had warned her many times, one word out of place and she would be thrown out without pay. Later that afternoon, Elise sat on the porch steps, clutching her small notebook in her lap. With a stubby crayon, she drew another picture, a girl in the rain, a locked door, and next to her a tall figure holding an umbrella. She wrote one shaky word under it: safe. She folded the page carefully, tucking it into her pocket. Inside, Rachel watched from the window. Her lips curled into a thin smile. "Still drawing your little lies?" she muttered. "We'll see how long that lasts." Meanwhile, across town, Alexander sat in his office, papers spread before him. His mind, usually sharp with business strategies, now focused only on Elise. The image of her trembling hands, her whispered words, haunted him. He picked up his phone and called Detective Sarah Monroe. "Any news?" he asked. Sarah's voice came steady. "Yes, I spoke with Elise's teacher, Ms. Collins. She said Elise has been unusually withdrawn, losing weight, falling asleep in class, sometimes flinching when touched. The school filed health concerns, but the stepmother always dismissed them. I've also checked hospital records, no recent checkups for the child in over a year." Alexander's jaw tightened. "So it's true." "More than true," Sarah replied, "but we'll need direct evidence from inside the house. Someone who has seen it happen, that maid. Grace, can you reach her?" Alexander exhaled. "I'll try. Before we continue, I want to pause. Imagine being Grace, the maid who sees everything but fears losing her job if she speaks. Would you risk your safety to save a child, or would fear silence you? Please share your thoughts in the comments and rate this story from 1 to 10. Your words might inspire someone else to choose courage over silence. Now, let us return to the story. That evening, Alexander returned quietly to Elise's neighborhood. He parked near the corner, waiting until Rachel's car pulled out of the driveway. She was leaving for her regular social gathering. As soon as she drove away, Alexander approached the house. Grace opened the door, startled to see him. Her eyes darted nervously. "Mr. Hayes, you shouldn't be here. If she finds out—" Alexander raised a calming hand. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to know the truth. Please, Grace, tell me, what is happening to Elise inside this house?" Grace's lips trembled. She looked around, as if afraid the walls might be listening. I can't. She'll fire me. I have an old mother to care for. Without this job, we'll have nothing." Alexander's voice softened. "I understand your fear, but think of Elise. She's only 7. She has no voice, no protection. If you stay silent, she will suffer alone. But if you speak, I will protect you. You have my word." Tears welled in Grace's eyes. She shook her head, torn between fear and conscience. I need time." She closed the door quickly, leaving Alexander standing on the porch, his heart heavy but not without hope. Inside, Elise had watched from the staircase. She had seen Alexander's face, heard his gentle tone. For the first time in days, a flicker of hope warmed her chest. She clutched the folded drawing in her pocket tighter. That night, Rachel returned home in high spirits. She poured herself a glass of wine and laughed softly. "Everything is falling into place," she muttered. But as she walked down the hall, she noticed Elise peeking from her bedroom. Her smile vanished. She stormed forward, yanked the notebook from Elise's hand, and tore out the drawings. "You think anyone will believe your scribbles?" she hissed. "You are nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing." She crumpled the papers and threw them into the fireplace. Elise's tears spilled over. She hugged her knees, trembling. But in her pocket, hidden safely, one drawing remained, the one with the word safe. She pressed her hand over it, silently promising herself not to give up. Miles away, Alexander sat awake in his study. He stared at the phone, waiting. Finally, it buzzed with a message. It was from Grace. "I can't stay silent anymore. Meet me tomorrow evening. I'll bring proof." Alexander's eyes hardened. The tide was turning. The following evening, the city lights flickered under a pale sky. Alexander sat in his black Mercedes, parked discreetly near a quiet cafe on the edge of town. He checked his watch, his jaw tense. Grace had sent him a message. "Meet me here. I'll talk." Minutes later, the door opened and Grace stepped inside nervously. She was in her mid-20s, her plain dress slightly wrinkled, her face pale with fear. She slid into the booth opposite Alexander, her hands twisting together. "Thank you for coming," Alexander said calmly, his voice low but steady. "I know this isn't easy." Grace glanced around the cafe, her eyes darting like a trapped bird. "If she finds out I spoke to you, she'll ruin me. But," her voice cracked, "I can't stand by anymore. That little girl, she doesn't deserve what's happening." Alexander leaned forward. "Tell me everything." Grace swallowed hard. "Rachel, she pretends to be sweet when people are around. But behind closed doors, she's cruel. She locks Elise outside, sometimes for hours. She withholds food, calls her names, says she's worthless. Once she kept her in the storage shed for 3 nights. I wanted to call someone, but Rachel threatened me. She said if I opened my mouth, I'd lose my job and never work again." Tears filled her eyes. "I've seen bruises on Elise's arms from when Rachel grabbed her too hard. I've heard her crying herself to sleep. It's torture, Mr. Hayes, torture." Alexander's fists clenched on the table. His voice dropped like steel. "Do you have proof?" Grace nodded shakily. She pulled out her phone, unlocking it with trembling fingers. "I recorded one of her outbursts. I couldn't watch anymore. Here, listen." She pressed play. Rachel's voice burst from the speaker, sharp and venomous. "You stupid child! Do you think anyone will care about you? Even your father doesn't want you. If you say a single word, I'll lock you in the shed until you beg me to stop breathing." The cafe seemed to fall silent around them. Alexander's eyes darkened, fury burning in their depths. He closed his hand over the phone gently, steadying himself. "Thank you, Grace. This is exactly what I needed. You did the right thing." Grace's shoulders shook as she covered her face. "I couldn't sleep anymore. Her cries, they haunted me." Alexander placed a hand on the table, firm and reassuring. "You're not alone now. I'll make sure Elise is safe. And you won't be harmed for telling the truth. I promise you that." Before we continue, let me pause for a moment. If you had been Grace, trapped between fear of losing your job and guilt over a child's suffering, what would you have done? Would you stay silent or risk everything to protect her? Please share your thoughts in the comments and rate this story from 1 to 10. Your words matter. They remind us all that silence can hurt, but courage can save lives. Now, back to the story. That night, Alexander returned to his mansion, his mind racing. He played the recording again, Rachel's cruel voice echoing in the quiet study. Each word was like a blade. Elise's small face flashed in his mind. The trembling hands, the silent tears, he felt the weight of responsibility pressing on his chest. He called Detective Sarah Monroe. "I have it," he said firmly. "An audio recording, Rachel's voice threatening Elise." Sarah's voice sharpened. "That's powerful evidence. Combine it with the teacher's reports and the neighbor's testimony, and we have enough to request an emergency investigation." "Do it," Alexander replied. His tone carried no hesitation. "This ends now." Meanwhile, inside the house, Elise sat quietly in her room. Her stepmother had scolded her again at dinner, accusing her of eating too slowly. Her stomach twisted with hunger, but fear locked her voice. She curled under the thin blanket, clutching the small drawing she had hidden from Rachel. The one with the word "safe." For the first time, she let herself imagine what it would feel like to live in a house without fear. A place where doors were not locked to punish, but closed gently to protect. She whispered softly, almost as if in prayer, "Please, someone save me." 2 days later, Alexander returned to Elise's house, but this time he was not alone. Detective Sarah stood beside him, badge gleaming under the gray sky. Rachel opened the door, her smile practiced and sweet. "Mr. Hayes," she greeted smoothly, her eyes flickering to the detective. "And who might this be?" Sarah's expression was professional, her tone cool. "Detective Monroe, Child Protection Division. We've received reports of potential neglect and abuse in this household. We'll need to speak with both you and Elise." Rachel's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before returning. "Neglect? Abuse? That's absurd. Elise is just sensitive. You know how children are." Alexander's eyes burned into hers. "Save your lies. We have proof." Sarah held up a small recorder. "An audio file captured inside this very house. Your voice, Mrs. Reynolds, threatening a child." Rachel's face drained of color. Her lips parted, but no words came. Elise peeked from behind the hallway, her eyes wide as she saw Alexander standing there, strong and unyielding. For the first time in weeks, hope lit her gaze. Rachel's mask cracked. Her voice rose sharply. "She's lying. That maid, Grace, she betrayed me. None of this is true." Sarah stepped forward. "The more you deny, the deeper you sink. We'll be conducting a full investigation. Until then, Elise will not be left alone in your care." Elise's small body trembled, but she took a tiny step forward, her hand reaching out toward Alexander. He knelt, opening his arms, and she rushed into them, burying her face in his chest. His coat wrapped around her once more, shielding her from the storm inside the house. Rachel's furious voice rang behind them, but Alexander didn't look back. He carried Elise out the door, his steps steady, his resolve unshakable. For the first time, Elise felt the weight of the locked doors lifting away. The news of the investigation spread quickly. Within days, Child Protection Services had filed an emergency petition, and the family court scheduled a hearing. The courthouse was a tall, imposing building of stone, its hallways echoing with footsteps and murmurs. Alexander arrived early, dressed in a dark suit. Beside him walked Detective Sarah Monroe, her face calm and professional. And holding his hand, with her small fingers trembling but steady, was Elise. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair neatly tied back. Her eyes darted nervously at the crowd of strangers, but whenever she looked up at Alexander, his steady gaze reminded her she was not alone anymore. Inside the courtroom, Rachel was already seated. Her appearance was flawless as ever, silk blouse, polished heels, lips painted a careful shade of red. But her eyes flickered with unease when she saw Alexander leading Elise inside. Next to her sat Victor Hale, a sharp-tongued attorney with cold eyes. The judge, a woman in her 50s with a composed expression, entered and called the court to order. We are here to determine the welfare of the child, Elise Carter, in light of allegations of neglect and abuse. Both sides will present evidence. Victor rose first, his voice smooth. Your Honor, my client is a devoted stepmother. These allegations are exaggerated misunderstandings fueled by outsiders interfering with family matters. The child is simply shy and sensitive. My client has provided care, food, and shelter. The real harm is being caused by false accusations. Rachel nodded, her expression one of practiced sorrow. But when Detective Sarah stepped forward, her voice carried the weight of truth. Your Honor, we have audio evidence recorded inside the household. She pressed a button on the recorder. Rachel's voice burst through the speakers, cruel and sharp. You stupid child! No one will care about you. Even your father doesn't want you. If you say a word, I'll lock you in the shed until you beg me to stop breathing. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Rachel's face drained of color. She shifted in her seat, her lips parting but no words forming. The judge's brows furrowed. This is your voice, Mrs. Reynolds? Rachel stammered. I was upset. She was misbehaving. It was just frustration. Frustration does not justify threats of confinement. The judge cut her off firmly. Next, Ms. Collins, Elise's teacher, testified. She described the child's weight loss, her exhaustion in class, and the reports she had filed. Then Mrs. Cooper, the neighbor, spoke about seeing Elise left outside for hours. Finally, Grace, the maid, entered the stand. Her hands shook, but her voice carried conviction. I was afraid to speak before, but I can't live with the guilt anymore. I saw her locked out. I saw her starved. I heard Rachel say Elise was worthless. It happened, Your Honor, over and over. Tears filled Grace's eyes. She looked at Elise, who sat quietly beside Alexander, and whispered, I'm sorry I didn't protect you sooner. Elise's lips trembled, but she gave the faintest nod of forgiveness. Before we continue, I want to pause. Imagine being Elise, sitting in court hearing adults finally tell the truth about what you suffered. What would it feel like to be believed at last? Please leave your thoughts in the comments and rate this story from 1 to 10. Your words remind us all of the power of truth. Now, let us return to the story. Victor stood again, trying to regain control. Your Honor, children often exaggerate. Audio recordings can be misleading, and this maid has admitted she stayed silent for months. Her testimony is unreliable. But Alexander rose slowly, his tall frame commanding the room. His voice was calm, but every word struck with force. Your Honor, this is not exaggeration. I found Elise standing outside in a storm, locked out by the very woman claiming to protect her. I carried her, soaked and freezing, into safety. I looked into her eyes and I saw a child who had been silenced for too long. She may not have shouted her pain aloud, but she drew it. She showed me with her hands, with her tears, and today she deserves to be heard. He turned, kneeling beside Elise. Sweetheart, would you like to share something? The courtroom held its breath. Elise hesitated, her small hands trembling. Alexander slid a piece of paper and a pencil toward her. She bent over, carefully writing in uneven letters. She handed the note to the clerk, who passed it to the judge. The judge read aloud, I was locked out, I was hungry, I was scared, but now I feel safe with him. A hush fell over the room. Rachel shot to her feet, her face twisted with panic. She's lying. She's been manipulated. This is all a trick. But her voice cracked under the weight of the evidence. The audio, the witnesses, the child's own trembling words. The judge struck the gavel. Order in the court. Her gaze was sharp as she turned to Rachel. These are not misunderstandings. This is a pattern of abuse. You will answer for your actions. Rachel's mask slipped entirely. Her face hardened, her voice rising into a scream. "You'll regret this, all of you. Without me, none of this family will stand." Court officers moved closer as her voice echoed against the stone walls. Alexander wrapped an arm protectively around Elise. She leaned against him, her small body trembling. But for the first time, she didn't look away. The hearing was not over yet, but the tide had shifted. The truth was no longer hidden in whispers or drawings. It stood exposed, undeniable, in the light of justice. The courtroom buzzed with whispers after Rachel's outburst. The judge struck the gavel sharply. "Order! This hearing is not finished. We will continue with the presentation of evidence." Victor, Rachel's attorney, leaned close to her, whispering urgently. But Rachel's face was pale, her lips trembling. She tried to compose herself, smoothing her hair, forcing a smile that looked more like a mask cracking at the edges. "Your Honor," Victor began again, "my client is under great stress due to her pregnancy. Emotional outbursts should not be mistaken as proof of abuse. In fact, we have medical records confirming her condition. She is not only a caretaker but also an expectant mother who must be protected." He handed a folder to the clerk. Inside were documents stamped with a bright red seal. Prenatal certificates, doctor's notes, all apparently confirming Rachel's pregnancy. Rachel placed a hand on her stomach, her voice soft and trembling. "Please, I may have made mistakes, but I only wanted to raise this child in a healthy family. I am carrying life inside me. I would never harm Elise. You must believe me." The courtroom murmured with mixed emotions. Some faces softened, others frowned in doubt. But Detective Sarah Monroe stepped forward, her eyes steady. "Your Honor, my team has already verified these documents. The seal was copied from a legitimate hospital file, but the content is fabricated. The hospital has confirmed that no pregnancy record exists for Rachel Reynolds. These are falsified medical documents." Gasps filled the room. Rachel's face turned crimson, her composure shattering. The judge's eyes narrowed. "Are you saying the defendant presented forged records to this court?" Sarah placed another folder on the evidence table. "Yes, and we have bank transfer receipts, payments from Rachel Reynolds to an intermediary connected with Dr. Collins, the so-called physician who signed these notes. It is a clear attempt to manipulate the court and secure custody of assets." Rachel's eyes widened. "No, that's not true, But her voice faltered when the judge lifted the folder, scanning the evidence with a cold gaze. "Before we continue, let me pause. If you were sitting in this courtroom, watching Rachel's lies unravel one by one, what would you feel? Relief, anger, or pity? Please share your emotions in the comments and rate this story from 1 to 10. Your reflections help us all think about truth and justice. Now, let us return to the story." Victor rose again, desperation creeping into his polished tone. "Your Honor, even if there was a misunderstanding with the medical documents, it does not erase the fact that Rachel has cared for Elise since her mother's death. She has been the primary woman in her life." But Alexander stood, his voice firm and resonant. "Cared for her. I found Elise standing in the rain, locked out of her own home. I heard her say with her trembling hands and drawings that she was afraid, hungry, and alone. This woman did not care for her. She broke her spirit, and now she lies to this court inventing a pregnancy, forging records, bribing officials. Tell me, is that the behavior of a caretaker or of someone desperate to seize control?" The judge regarded Alexander with a steady gaze, then turned back to Victor. "Do you have any response to the evidence of falsified documents and bribery?" Victor's lips pressed tightly. He shuffled his papers, but no answer came. At that moment, Detective Sarah produced one final piece of evidence. She placed a small USB drive on the table. "Your Honor, this is a recording retrieved from Rachel Reynolds' personal phone under warrant. It captures a conversation between her, Victor Hale, and Dr. Collins. In this recording, They discuss creating fake pregnancy documents and medical recommendations to remove Elise from her father's custody. The judge ordered the file to be played. The voices filled the courtroom. Rachel's cold tone. "I need a paper saying the girl cannot control her behavior. Collins, you write that she needs isolation." Collins's hesitant voice. "But I haven't examined her." Victor's steady, calculating tone. "It doesn't matter. Sign it. With the pregnancy certificate and guardianship form, Rachel will control everything. The house, the assets, the child." The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Rachel's face turned ashen. She slammed her hand against the table. "That recording! It's fake! You're all against me!" The judge's voice cut sharply. "Enough! Sit down!" Rachel sank back into her chair, her hands shaking. For the first time, her mask had fully crumbled. Her eyes darted wildly, no longer the confident woman who once manipulated everyone around her. Elise, sitting beside Alexander, held onto his hand tightly. Her small lips trembled, but she whispered, "Daddy, safe." Alexander looked down at her, his eyes softening. "Yes, sweetheart, safe." The judge leaned back in her chair, her decision weighing heavy in the silence. "This court recognizes clear evidence of abuse, neglect, and fraudulent documents. We will recess briefly before announcing the ruling." As the gavel struck, officers moved closer to Rachel's side. She tried to rise, but her knees buckled. For the first time, she looked small, powerless. Alexander turned to Elise, kneeling beside her. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "It's almost over," he whispered. "You'll never be left in the rain again." Elise's tears spilled over, but this time they carried relief. She clung to him, her tiny arms wrapped tight around his neck. And for the first time, she believed the nightmare might finally be ending. The gavel struck sharply as the judge returned to the bench. The murmurs in the courtroom faded into heavy silence. Everyone's eyes fixed on Judge Coleman, her face calm but firm. "This court," she began, her voice steady, "has reviewed the testimonies, the recordings, and the documents presented. The evidence is clear. The child, Elise Carter, has suffered emotional neglect and deliberate cruelty at the hands of her stepmother, Rachel Reynolds. Furthermore, attempts were made to falsify medical records and manipulate this court with fabricated pregnancy documents. Such actions cannot be tolerated." Rachel gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "No! This is a conspiracy. She pointed at Alexander, her voice shrill. "He wants to steal everything from me. He poisoned you all against me." "Enough!" The judge's voice cut through her cries. "This is not about property. This is about the safety and well-being of a child." The courtroom fell still. Judge Coleman continued. "Effective immediately, full custody of Elise Carter is awarded to her biological father, David Carter." Alexander's chest tightened as he heard those words. Elise sat beside him, her small hand gripping his tightly. For the first time, he felt the weight of fear lifting from her trembling fingers. The judge's voice grew firmer. "Rachel Reynolds, you are hereby convicted of child abuse, neglect, and submission of falsified documents. You will be remanded into custody pending sentencing." Gasps echoed across the courtroom. Rachel's face drained of color. She staggered to her feet, her voice breaking into a scream. "You'll regret this, all of you! Without me, this family will fall apart!" Two officers stepped forward, gripping her arms firmly. She struggled wildly, her hair falling across her face, her polished mask now shattered beyond repair. As she was dragged toward the side door, her words dissolved into incoherent rage. Elise pressed her face against Alexander's side, covering her ears. He bent down, wrapping both arms around her protectively, shielding her from the storm of Rachel's downfall. "Before we continue, let me pause. If you had been in that courtroom watching Rachel be led away while Elise finally found protection, what emotions would fill your heart? Relief, justice, or sorrow that it took so long? Please share your thoughts in the comments and rate this story from 1 to 10. Your reflections remind us how powerful truth and courage can be. Now, back to the story. The judge struck the gavel once more. This court is adjourned. The tension broke like a wave. Grace, the maid, wept quietly in the back row. Relief washing over her tired face, Mrs. Cooper, the elderly neighbor, dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. Elise's teacher, Ms. Collins, gave a small nod of triumph. Her reports had not been in vain. Detective Sarah Monroe walked over, her expression softening as she bent down to Elise's level. "You're safe now," she said gently. "No one will ever lock you out again." Elise looked at her shyly, then whispered one fragile word. "Thank you." Sarah smiled warmly. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun broke through the clouds. Alexander carried Elise in his arms as they stepped down the marble steps. Reporters stood nearby, cameras flashing, but Alexander ignored them all. He wasn't there for headlines. He was there for the trembling little girl who clung to him like a lifeline. He whispered softly, "It's over, Elise. You're free." She nestled her face into his shoulder, her tiny voice muffled but clear. "Home?" "Yes," Alexander said firmly. "Home." That evening, back at his mansion, the air felt lighter than it had in years. Mrs. Taylor prepared a warm meal, the aroma of roasted chicken and fresh bread filling the halls. Grace arrived quietly at the door, unsure if she would be welcome. Alexander greeted her with gratitude. "You were brave. Because of you, Elise is safe." Grace lowered her head, tears streaming down. "I wish I had spoken sooner." "You spoke when it mattered most," Alexander replied gently. Elise walked over timidly, holding her notebook. She opened it to a fresh page and drew a small house with a red roof. A tall figure beside a little girl under an umbrella. At the bottom, she wrote one shaky word in big letters: family. Alexander knelt beside her. His eyes stinging with unshed tears, he touched the drawing softly. "Yes," he whispered, "that's exactly what we are now." That night, Elise slept in her new bedroom, wrapped in a soft blanket, her notebook safe beside her. No locks on the door, no cruel voices, just the steady comfort of knowing she was loved. Alexander stood by the doorway for a long time, watching her chest rise and fall in peaceful rhythm. He exhaled slowly, a weight lifting from his soul. For years he had lived with walls around his heart, but now, because of a child's silent drawings and unspoken cries, those walls were crumbling. He whispered into the quiet room, words he had once been too afraid to speak. "I promise, Elise, you'll never stand alone in the rain again." The days that followed the trial passed like a quiet sunrise after a long storm. For the first time in years, Elise woke to mornings filled not with fear, but with gentle light streaming through her window and the soft sound of birds in the garden outside. In the Carter mansion, laughter began to echo through halls once silent. Mrs. Taylor would hum softly in the kitchen while preparing breakfast. Grace, no longer weighed down by fear, visited often to help Elise with small tasks, her guilt slowly healing as Elise forgave her with a simple smile. Alexander kept his promise. He was present every day. He drove Elise to school, waited outside therapy sessions, and sat beside her each evening at dinner. The once distant, lonely man had found a purpose greater than wealth or business. He had found his reason to live in the quiet strength of a child's trust. One afternoon, Alexander took Elise to see Dr. Leah Simmons, a gentle speech therapist with kind eyes. The room was warm, filled with bright toys and colorful posters. Dr. Simmons spoke softly, teaching them simple signs and encouraging Elise to express her thoughts without fear. Elise hesitated at first, but when she saw Alexander learning alongside her, clumsy but determined, she began to giggle. It was a sound so rare, so precious, that Alexander froze for a moment, stunned. He laughed with her, a laugh full of relief, as though learning how to breathe again. Each day, Elise grew stronger. She started drawing not only storms and locked doors, but gardens, sunshine, and houses filled with warmth. In one drawing, she sketched Alexander kneeling beside her, holding her small hand. At the bottom, she wrote in uneven letters, "Safe with Dad." When Alexander saw it, his throat tightened. He framed the drawing and hung it in the dining room, a daily reminder of the bond that had saved them both. Before we continue, let me pause. If you had walked this journey with Elise, seeing her transform from fear to courage, what moment touched your heart most? The night she drew hope, the day she wrote "Safe with Dad," or the moment in court when she finally believed her voice mattered? Share your thoughts in the comments and rate this story from 1 to 10. Your words are part of this healing journey too. Now, let us return to the story. A few weeks later, the community center hosted a gathering to honor those who had spoken up for Elise. Detective Sarah Monroe was recognized for her persistence. Mrs. Cooper, the neighbor, shared how she wished she had acted sooner, but was glad she found her voice in time. Grace stood trembling at the microphone, but when she spoke, her words carried the courage she once thought she lacked. "I stayed silent too long," she said, tears glistening. "But silence protects the wrong people. Today I choose to speak, and I hope no child is ever left alone again." The room broke into warm applause, not loud, not boastful, but steady and healing. Elise walked forward, holding Alexander's hand. Together they unwrapped a drawing she had made. A house with bright windows, a tall man standing with a little girl beneath a glowing sun. At the bottom, in bold, uneven letters, was one word: home. The audience fell silent, some wiping tears. Alexander knelt beside her, his hand resting on the drawing. He whispered softly, "Yes, sweetheart, home." From that day on, the mansion no longer felt like a fortress of loneliness. It became a place of belonging. Meals were shared at the same table, doors stayed open, and Elise's laughter slowly filled the air that once held only silence. Alexander often found himself watching her, her small hands tracing letters, her eyes lighting up when she succeeded in signing a new phrase. Each moment reminded him that healing was not in grand gestures, but in the quiet, steady presence of love. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Elise tugged on his sleeve. She signed carefully, slowly, "I love you." Alexander's breath caught. He knelt, his eyes glistening, and signed back clumsily but with all his heart, "I love you too." Elise's smile bloomed, brighter than any sunrise. She threw her arms around his neck, holding on tightly. In that embrace, Alexander felt not only her healing, but his own. The story does not end with a courtroom verdict or the downfall of cruelty. It ends in the quiet glow of a lamp in a child's room, in the simple act of a father tucking in his daughter, in the whispered promise that tomorrow will be brighter. And perhaps, dear listener, that is the lesson we carry, that the wicked may wear masks, but truth will strip them away, that silence can wound, but courage can heal, that family is not measured in wealth or walls, but in the safety of knowing you will never be left outside in the rain. So I ask you now, which moment touched you most? Have you ever faced a choice between silence and truth? Please share your thoughts in the comments. If this story brought you warmth, I invite you to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs hope today. Because kindness multiplies only when it is shared, and light grows brighter when we kindle it together. Are you doing okay? Have you eaten well today? Remember, you deserve care and rest, just as Elise did. Take a moment for yourself because healing begins with small acts of love.